It's baffled scholars for 2 millennia. It is a puzzle made of multi-dimensional elements, an enigma with roots that reach back to the dawning of time, perhaps before. Daniel explained part of it. Ezekiel and Isaiah had glimpses into it. John saw it all for the time of the end. That time is now. Join Derek and Sharon Gilbert on a journey that spans the course of history, from Eden to Mount Hermon, from Hermon to Babel, from Babel to Rome, from Rome to the cross, and from there to us. Biblical prophecy is coming true before your eyes, and to understand it, you must discern the times both then and now. It's time to unravel the threads of this all-encompassing prophetic paradox. It's time to unravel Revelation.
Welcome to Unraveling Revelation. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we're back. We've been traveling and doing all sorts of things, and running a canine recovery ward.
Yes, Grace and Glory both had to get spayed, their special visit to the veterinarian, and so they are recovering now, and that has been an interesting journey, but thankfully they're recovering very, very well. I mean, by all accounts, everything we can read, and Sharon has been primarily responsible for the care and attention paid to Grace and Glory during this period, but it looks like they are just recovering as well as we could have hoped, even better.
Seriously, their recovery is textbook great.
Yes.
However, that means that they feel really well, and they want out of their little onesies, and they want freedom to do whatever they want to do, which means fighting. They love to spar with one another. Mm-hmm. Glory loves to challenge Grace. Glory is getting bigger and bigger. She's 32 pounds as of the vet visit. By the time you watch this, she may be 35.
But we appreciate your prayers, those of you who follow us on Facebook and have been seeing the pictures of them in their little onesies, which actually are a wonderful alternative to the cones that they're sent home with.
Oh, they hated those cones.
Oh, I can understand why.
And they would have gotten out of them.
Yeah.
Because Glory would have just pulled one off Grace, and she would have done the same for Glory.
Yeah. So anyway, that has been our life here the last couple of weeks. The last couple of weeks you've been watching on this program, Pastor Mike Hoggard talking about the UFO phenomenon, which some may see as fringe, but as we discussed during the program, there are more people who believe we're being visited by aliens than believe in God as He's revealed Himself in Scripture.
Isn't that interesting? And it's going to actually lead into our topic for today. We're still leading up to that appearance of Antichrist, all of the things that are going to take place in that probably the last 3.5 years, but we're going to also touch on the 2 witnesses, things like that. So
Armageddon and all of that.
Covering that tribulation week. Historically, a lot of things have occurred in the last couple of 100 years, and I've lost my train of thought.
A couple 100 years. We were talking this morning.
I would never do that.
We were talking about how history...
No. I said would lead into. What was it I said would lead into?
Well, the UFO phenomenon and fringe topics.
Thank you.
The appearance of...
Oh, I tell you what, you get to be my age, and seriously, and we're not even going to edit this out, because I want you to know that I go through it too. I know many of you deal with just can't think of a noun. Adjectives are fine. Can't think of a noun. But yes, the UFO phenomenon, UFO, noun, this began probably a couple of 100 years ago, because there were things, cigar-shaped things that were being seen in the sky at least 150 years ago. But there are actually reports that go back several hundred years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can go all the way back to the time of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BC, seeing flying shields.
Yes, exactly. So this is not a new phenomenon. The uptick in the number that are being seen, the visitations, this is new. The last couple of 100 years has seen a major shift theopolitically. And by that I mean the spiritual war.
Right. No, absolutely. We've been doing a lot of research on the history of the world leading up to the creation of Israel in 1948 for a couple of reasons. Number one, as we've been talking in this program, since October 7th, there is a rise in anti-Semitic sentiment among the church. There is a belief among some Christians that we have replaced Israel in the Bible as far as prophetic promises to Israel. Those yet to be fulfilled involve the church and not the geopolitical state of Israel or the Jewish people today. And we reject that for a number of reasons that have been previously discussed. But we see, as we look back through history, the last couple hundred years especially, the political changes that have led to where we are today and the way things are aligning today that now make it seem very plausible for the whole world to come together against Israel.
Yes. The history, first century, Greece and Rome. It was the Greco-Roman Empire. In many ways, the West, capital W, is a revival of the Greco-Roman Empire, as if it never really went away. But in the middle of that came the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah. There are those who aren't even looking at this from a Christian worldview, who refer to the United States and Great Britain before the U.S., the rise of the U.S., especially in the 20th century, as the empire that never ended.
Yeah.
Just a continuation of the Roman Empire. That Jupiter, the storm god, who Jesus identified as Satan, because Jupiter was just Baal by a different name. Matthew 12, beginning in verse 22, when he's confronted, you're casting out demons by the power of Beelzebul, Baal the prince, and Jesus says, no, Satan casts out demons by Satan, his own power. How will Satan's kingdom stand?
Right.
So we have seen that base of power move further and further west, from Rome to, say, the Holy Roman Empire in Germany, to France, to England, to now the United States.
Well, you might even say it was in Constantinople for a while, but then it got supplanted by the Ottomans when they took it over and changed the name of the city to Istanbul.
Right, yeah.
Hence the song.
Yes, so in the 15th century, the Ottomans took it over, and Istanbul, not Constantinople. And for centuries, the Ottoman Turks ruled, but we began to see in the beginning of the 19th century, Arabs beginning to rebel against the rule of the Ottomans, because it was the Arabs who first brought Islam to the world.
Yes. Now, you have to ask yourself, why go that long under the Ottomans? Why would the Arabs live that long? They were waiting for weakness. That weakness began in Eastern Europe when those far reaches of the Ottoman Empire began to rebel. And I think that you can probably lay the fault of that at the Ottoman Empire's structure, because it was so big.
Right.
They could not directly rule those far-flung countries. So what they did in order to bring in the money, because let's face it, every empire needs money. They had tax farming. Tax farming it's similar to what was going on in the Levant in the first century. You had tax collectors who collected for Rome.
Sure, okay.
They gave the money to Rome directly. So let's say we owe 1,000 drachma to Rome, which I have no idea what it was. Let's say 1,000 drachma, which I think was Greece, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, 1,000 somethings to Rome. So I go out and I collect 2,000. I keep 1,000.
Right.
So tax farming for the Ottoman Empire was the same way. They paid directly. They collected more than they paid the Ottomans.
It was sort
the
of
Ottomans
their commission.
knew that, exactly. Well, because of that, those local, the provincial tax collectors, they started getting all uppity. And they wanted to rule directly.
Accumulated wealth. Why am I turning any of this over to the Ottomans?
Exactly.
Sure.
So they started getting their own little army, and then these far-flung reaches of the Eastern Europe began to rebel. And as they rebelled, Russia went in and took over. So you've got this war that's causing the whole sick man of Europe syndrome that leads us into the 18th century.
And you saw some of that conflict with, like, the Crimean War in the 18th century, and then in the 19th century, additional conflicts and rebellions.
Well, Crimean was in the 19th century. But you saw the Russo-Turkish War.
Oh, that's right, the Russo-Turkish War.
Yeah, which I think was late 18th.
Okay. And while that was going on, then you had
and then Napoleon came along.
Yeah, early 19th, late 18th, early 19th. there have always been wars and rumors of war flying around, and if we try to study history in a silo, as though what affects the United States or what affects biblical Israel in the Old Testament, New Testament period, without looking at what was affecting Anatolia, Persia, Africa, we miss some of the influences and things that have affected
we really do.
World history.
So the Arabs were waiting for this weakness.
Right.
So when the weakness occurred, that's when the Arab nation, and the big one was the Saud tribe.
Right. In the 18th century, a cleric named Muhammad ibn Abd al-Wahhab, who's given his name to the Wahhabist strain of Sunni Islam, let's say al-Wahhab, I'll call him that. Al-Wahhab died in 1792 at the age of 89. He was from one of the four major schools of Sunni Islamist thought, Hanbali. The Hanbali school predominantly followed in Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now Qatar, even though it's not spelled the same, Qatar, they are essentially the same name as the Kedarites in the Bible, Qed or Kedar.
Same consonantal.
Same consonantal, so it's essentially the same people. So the Qatarites of today are just the Kedarites of the Bible. Hanbali followers, demographic majority in 4 of the emirates of the United Arab Emirates, the UAE. And there are large numbers of them in other places like Bahrain, Syria, Oman, Yemen, and among the Bedouins in Jordan. Now, this is a strain of Islamic thought that wants to revert to the way it was followed under the first 3 generations of Islamic leaders, Muhammad and the first 2 generations who followed. This is a fundamentalist movement. They reject what they consider religious innovation. And the Ottoman Empire, with its acceptance of the Sufi strain of Islam, which is a more mystical strain, divine revelation, whirling dervishes and things like this, the focus on, even things like the focus on the really awesome Turkish mustaches instead of the beards that the Arabs favored.
Right.
Those were all rejected by the fundamentalist Sunnis of the Hanbali school, and specifically al-Wahhab and his followers. Well, the Hanbali school began to gain influence because al-Wahhab found an ally in Muhammad bin Saud, from which we get the name of the Saudi family, the House of Saud, from which we get the name Saudi Arabia. This occurred in 1744 when al-Wahhab made a pact with Muhammad bin Saud, and this became a religious alliance. But you have to understand that in Islam there is no separation between church and state. A religious alliance is a political alliance, and this became the ruling belief system, the worldview of the Saudi family for about the next 280 years. In other words, until almost the present day. Mohammed bin Salman is changing things now. We can touch on that in a bit, but the fact is, if we look back at history and the influence of this 18th century alliance between Ibn al-Wahhab and Muhammad bin Saud, how that affected things in the 19th century and how that led to the rise of the Zionist movement.
Well, not only at the time that the sick man of Europe began to show weakness, the Ottoman Empire, not only did the Arabs decide that they were, the House of Saud, go after the Turks, they also went after the Shiites.
Right. And that's a really good point too. Again, religious alliance, also a political alliance. There's also an ethnic component to this because the Arabs and the Turks don't generally like each other. And then, of course, the Persians, which are Shia, the Persians and the Arabs don't really like each other either. So you've got an ethnic tension that is also compounded by the religious disagreements, and with the Wahhabists especially, a religious disagreement with their worldview was heresy. And so you were considered not even a Muslim anymore And so they were free, according to their belief, their understanding of Muhammad's teachings, to kill you and take your stuff. That's basically what it comes down to.
Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about this, because I think this background is so important to understanding what began to happen in the 19th century leading up to World War I.
Absolutely.
Which honestly is what we're about to repeat.
More unraveling revelation straight ahead. Giants, gods, dragons, they're all real. We may not see them with our natural eyes, but their handiwork is evident in what's happening in the world around us, the spiritual warfare taking place.
It is so true. It's obvious in Israel, but worldwide. Historically, we've seen this happen. And we want you to get excited about the Old Testament and the New, and the giants, gods, and dragons within it, because your kids need this information. So do you.
Yes. We're living in prophetic times. Help make sense of it with our special offer through July. Our book, Giants, Gods, and Dragons, which takes a fresh look at end times prophecy. My book's Bad Moon Rising, about the spiritual forces behind Islam, and Last Clash of the Titans, the overlap between what we were told is Greek mythology and the Bible, and our DVD based on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. All of this, an $80 value for just $45 plus shipping and handling, now through July, only at our online store, gilberthouse.org/store. Welcome back to Unraveling Revelation. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and I'm going to have some water here in a minute. We just want to thank you again and again for allowing us to have this set, allowing us to have this barn. Without you, seriously, this would never have happened.
Yeah, that's right. We'd still be working in a bedroom, which is doable.
We could do it again if we had to.
Absolutely. But the fact that we had this building here that was already constructed, already on a concrete slab, just needed to upgrade the electric, put in some HVAC, better lighting, obviously. You've made that possible, and we appreciate your support, because it makes it possible for us to focus our time and study on this instead of trying to do this evenings and weekends, which is what we had done before coming to the Ozarks to partner with Skywatch TV. So
that
again,
is so true.
Thank you so much.
I want to remind you also that we are going to be leading a tour back to Israel in March of next year. If you are interested, you can go to our website, gilberthouse.org/travel. Everything you need to know is there. And by the way, if you are interested in going on another solidarity tour with us,
yes,
we may actually take a second one.
Yeah, we've been contacted by Lipkin Tours, and they're trying to bring more Christians to Israel to show support for Israel during this time. We were there in early May. We were never in any danger. We felt safe the entire time, and it was honestly the most powerful, the most emotional of the 4 times that we've been to Israel.
Oh, the Lord's hand was on that tour. It was amazing. Everybody who was there, everybody, and that includes our guide, our driver, everyone,
yes,
really had an amazing time. So if you are interested in that, let us know. A good way to reach us is
Derek@gilberthouse.org or info@gilberthouse.org. Either one of those will get an email to us, and we'll gauge interest. But we went with a group of 7 others in May, and if we can pull together another group of a dozen or so, we'll be happy to go back and show you what we saw. We visited sites that were attacked on October 7th, met with people who lived through that day, and yeah, just some powerful things. You can go back in our archives at unravelingrevelation.tv a couple of weeks ago. Look for the episode called Solidarity with Israel, and where we showed some of the video that we shot while we were there and explained what we went through, what we experienced while we were there. It's very, very powerful. So if you're interested, info@gilberthouse.org.
Back to the House of Saud. I was looking at a map. I was so surprised. I looked at a map of the area controlled by the Saud family, that tribe. It was more than Saudi Arabia. It was huge. It went over into modern day Jordan.
Yeah, yeah. The division of the Levant and broader Middle East after World War I was done through negotiations between the French, the Brits, the Russians.
Drawing lines on a map.
Drawing lines on a map, essentially. The Arabs didn't get a whole lot of input into that, despite the work of men like T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. But they did pick some winners and some losers. There was a Hussein who was made king of Syria in Damascus until the French decided around 1920 that they were, okay, he'd had enough. And so they went in and basically kicked him out, and the French took over Syria and Lebanon for a while. That was part of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, the Hashemite kingdom of Arabia, also established. But after oil was discovered in 1939, even before that, actually, a British intelligence officer named Jack Philby, whose son was the infamous Kim Philby, who turned out to be a double agent for the Soviets.
The so-called Cambridge Five.
Yeah, he was one of those. Jack Philby really went native and converted to Islam and became a very close confidant of King Ibn Saud, who is a very strong believer in the Wahhabist strain of Sunni Islam. And because the Wahhabists were happy to commit violence on other Muslims who didn't agree with their interpretation of the Quran, they were even more happy to commit violence against these Jews who were coming into Palestine with the idea of setting up an independent homeland, despite the fact that after 1922, that was part of the League of Nations Charter. So, but this goes back to, what was it that led the Jews to start moving, emigrating to that land that was, by all accounts...
Well, that's a long story, and I think we're going to have to get into a lot of that next week, but we can start it up by telling you, I was trying to find when anti-Semitism really began to boil in, well, not only in Europe, but also in Egypt and in Morocco, and a lot of North Africa. It's about the same time that the Sauds were taking over. So you've got the Sauds taking over this big region, sort of warring with the Turks. The Turks, this is the Ottoman Empire, that's the Turks. The Turks at war in Eastern Europe and elsewhere, trying to hang on to their phony baloney jobs. Great Britain supporting them for a long time, right up until World War I. And I think it was because we're going to stay your friend until we don't need you anymore. In around 1800, you start to see this regional warfare, we'll call it that, against Jews. And you'll see dozens, sometimes 100 or more, Jews who are burned, decapitated, run out of their villages, whole villages emptied out by pogroms from countries like Russia. I've got a list here that I can read in the next program. I just don't have it up. But because you see this drumbeat of hatred growing louder and louder and louder throughout the 19th century, about the mid-century, you get rich people, rich Jews, starting to buy up land in the Levant.
Right.
With the idea of sending people there to take hold, to farm, to hold on to it, because you can't just buy the land. Someone will just come and squat on it. So you have to have someone there to hold it.
Yeah.
So that was the idea leading up to around 1890. I'd have to look at the exact date. But there is a figure in history that I'm betting all of you are aware of, Theodore Herzl. And this gentleman made a huge difference. He was in many ways like the second Moses. He felt called to provide a homeland for the Jews who were being stripped of their homes and murdered throughout the world. He wanted to make it safe. He wanted to find a haven for the Jews to carve out their own place, build cities. Here was the problem. And I'll explain why Herzl began this in a minute, probably going into the next program. The problem was that he discovered, as with today, that the Jewish families, the Jewish merchants, even those who were very poor, were relatively content in their places. Those in Vienna, where he was from, He went over to Prussia and talked to, which is modern day Germany, plus a bunch of other countries, talked to the leaders there. He even talked to the Kaiser, Wilhelm II, and he talked to Wilhelm I. He tried, the first as well. He tried very hard to get permission to go into the land and set up a new haven for the Jews. But they didn't want to go. They did not want to leave. I have to close down my shop. I have to, this is my home. It took me forever to find a home I could actually rent. I'm building up a legacy for my children. Mm-hmm. Well, you can do that in this new land, in Palestine. No, will I even be able to, will they know my language there? Aren't they just dirty Arabs who live there? Well, let's face it, prejudice goes in all directions.
It does, yeah.
And they were primarily Arabs living there. Mm-hmm. And no, they did not speak German or French or Italian or Spanish or English. Mm-hmm. They didn't speak Russian. They didn't speak any of the main languages being spoken by Jews.
Right, and Jews did not speak Hebrew because Hebrew was primarily a religious language.
Their inside language, if you want to call it, that was Yiddish.
Right. Similar to Hebrew, but not Hebrew. Hebrew as a language basically had to be brought back almost from the dead in the early 1950s. A fellow by Naphtali Tur Sinai was responsible. He was the first director of the School of the Hebrew Language in Jerusalem. He's done some very interesting translations and showed that the creator god of the Canaanites, El, is actually mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Anyway, but the point is that Tur Sinai had to bring back this language. So Hebrew, as it's spoken today, as a living language, is only about 75 years old.
Oh yeah, you would assume that those living, that the teachers, the educated, would have been studying it. No.
So the bottom line is, not only did they have to travel a great distance without the benefit of the modern automobile or airplane, they had to do it moving to a place where they didn't know, and they didn't have any infrastructure, no support network, and possibly nobody around them who spoke their language, and possibly people around them who didn't want them there. So this was quite an adventure.
It was. Well, next week I will give you more information on the various events that took place and what led up to the Dreyfus Affair, which was the fire that ignited Theodore Herzl.
Yeah, and if we have enough time next week, explain to you why the Rothschild banking dynasty did not create the modern state of Israel.
No, they didn't.
That is a conspiracy theory with no basis in historical fact or truth. Our Lord does not need us to make things up. We're trying to find the truth, and of course, that all begins and ends with His Word, the Bible. Thank you for watching. This is Unraveling Revelation.
Unraveling Revelation is a viewer-supported outreach of Gilbert House Ministries. We'd love to hear from you. Contact us through our websites or drop us a line at P.O. Box 78, Crane, Missouri 65633.